Welcome. All right. Let's look at these announcements. First of all, your project is due on Thursday. I hope that doesn't come as a shock to anyone. You got the assignment early. I'm sure you've been working on it. So on Thursday, the way it's going to work is you're going to turn in a paper copy of the project, and it should all be stapled together, including the write-up that follows the sections that are described in the handout, and any spreadsheet printouts that you want to include. If you'd like to do a large format like an A3 paper, then you can staple that in as well. The cash flow diagram should be on there, and you can break that up onto multiple pages if it would be too small to represent it on a single page. I got a question this morning in the earlier section about the project, and the student asked if it's necessary to calculate the present worth of the future amounts, and it turns out that it's not. If you're curious, you can calculate the present values of those amounts, but really what we're looking for is to find out how does your savings account balance increase or decrease over time as your income is greater than your expenses, hopefully, when you're young, and then during retirement age, when you have less income and more expenses, then we'd expect that savings account balance to be decreasing. So really what it's about is each row is representing a different year, and we want to know what is the income, what is the savings, what are the expenses, for that year itself, and not in terms of a present value. So are there any other questions that you want to ask about the project? Because we have a little bit of time here before we get into the new material.
Because of inflation,
Mm-hmm.
how should we estimate for the next 5 years and then project it for the last 5?
Right. Inflation's a big unknown, isn't it? And you could get pretty rich if you knew exactly what the inflation was going to be in the future. You could become very wealthy. So I certainly don't know it. I think just the best you can do is make an educated guess. Do your planning based on that guess, and then if 5 years in the future, if you're modifying your spreadsheet, you'd update it with improved guesses. And so one way of doing it is to say, just look at the last 5 years, what has been the inflation, and maybe assume that that will continue for the entirety of your project, and just in the report say, I'll really be in trouble if inflation goes up a lot, and hopefully if there is lots of inflation, so will not only will your expenses inflate, but hopefully your income would as well. And then hopefully if there's a lot of inflation, then suddenly the banks will start to pay higher interest rates on your savings, and so fingers crossed, right? Other questions about the project? So while you're cramming for the exams, I'll be pouring through your reports. We'll all be very busy as we work towards the final exam.
Sir, about the announcement that you posted on Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
the last announcement, you asked us to use Google Finance, and there were some abbreviations of stocks.
Yeah.
But then I tried to check that out, but the thing is that I couldn't understand what the numbers
Yeah.
stood for.
All right, so you don't have to use Google Finance. I'm just giving you that as a resource, and so let me do a quick demonstration of how that works. All right, so it's called a stock ticker. Those abbreviations, so for example, MSFT. I don't know if Microsoft pays a dividend or not. Here they do. All right, so right here where it says div/yield, what that means is the yield is on a percentage basis what their dividend works out to on an annual basis. And so if you own Microsoft, if you bought it today at $55.48, that's dollars per share, then the amount that they pay you works out to 2.60% annual. So the dividend, that's sort of like an annual return. So in addition to getting a dividend, owners of Microsoft hope that the value of the stock will go up over time. That's what's called a capital gain. And so you can make money with stocks two ways. You can you can do both. You can get the dividends, and then you can also have a capital gain. So what you're looking for is what is the yield. And so if you look at a stock like Apple, I don't think they pay a yield. because they're, well, they do. I didn't know that Apple paid a dividend. They do, 1.98. I'm pretty sure Google doesn't. Yeah, no dividend, no yield for Google. And so when you buy Google, what you're just hoping is that the value of the stock goes up over time. You're hoping on a capital gain rather than dividend. Usually more mature companies are the ones that will pay a dividend because they're giving whatever extra cash they have to their investors rather than trying to grow the company by keeping the cash. So there's index funds. Those are individual stocks. There's also index funds, which is like a group of stocks together. They're considered maybe a little bit more safe than buying one individual stock. So one is called Spiders, SPY. It pays a yield of 2.62%. Maybe that's too small. Let me make it larger. There we go. So here's the yield, 2.6%. Mm-hmm. That's in dollars. That's their dividend, how much in dollars they're paying, and it's quarterly. So they pay a quarterly dividend of $1.21, and if you do 4 times 1.21 divided by the stock price, that's where the yield comes from on a percentage basis.
How do we benefit from these values? Like, how do we get, how much do we get in return?
Yeah. So let's say that you have $10,000 in your savings account. That $10,000, if you bought these spiders, as they're called, then your interest rate, your savings is going to grow at 2.62%. And so that company, every 3 months, will give you money into your account. And on an annual basis, they're giving you 2.62%. And so that's what, your savings account balance, the interest rate you should use for growing that would be whatever this yield is. Yeah. Any other questions? There's a lot of information there, right? You can see over time what the stock is doing. If you ever want to break your heart, check out Apple. Here's the big what if. What if your parents bought you Apple stock when you were born, Let's see, when were you guys born? 95? 96? All right, yeah. Apple was 86 cents back then, and now it's $105. So if your parents had invested in Apple, think about how easy your life would be at this point. Yeah. All right, you could light fires with money. Other questions about the project before we go? All right. On Tuesday, we're meeting in the computer lab. Thursday, I'm not sure about. We might do a different kind of activity on Thursday, but I'll get back to you about that. Tuesday, for sure, we'll be back in the computer lab in the other building. It's our second home. Today, we're going to be talking about learning curves, cost estimation. Learning curves aren't found in your book, at least not in the cost estimation section. So this is just some new material that's exclusively in the lectures, and then when we get together for Tuesday, that's when we're going to talk about depreciation. One last thing before we get into new material, let's talk about the final exam. For the 9 a.m. section, for section 2, our exam is on Monday the 11th, so that's a week from tomorrow. And the exam is from 2 to 4 p.m. It's comprehensive, meaning that any material from the entire course is fair game. And that's partly because it would be impossible to give a non-comprehensive exam. We're still using 1 plus I to the n power to calculate the time value of money and so on. But one thing I'll let you know is that the exam will be weighted proportionally. Most of the questions will come from the new material. And the questions from the old material will tend to be simpler than the newer questions. And so I'm not going to get into some minutia, some like tiny little complicated procedure from the earliest part of the course to try to trick you. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested more on a holistic basis. What do you remember and understand? And then the complicated minutia that I'm trying to trick you will come from the more recent material. not from the older material. All right. Yes? Yes. Yeah, so I'm going to provide a table lookup factor, and there's a, you know those equations, the P/A equations, A/F, and so on. I'll provide those equations, and you can bring one paper with you as well. You will have an Excel question, so the exam is going to be in the computer lab. Any other questions? For the yes?
Only one Excel question.
Oh, well, I shouldn't have said an Excel. At least one Excel question. I haven't finalized your exam yet, so I don't know if it'll be 1, 2, or 100. I'm not sure. Probably won't be 100. Probably will be 1 or 2. Those Excel questions are really hard for me to grade because I have to open up every spreadsheet and look through it, and it's like a criminal investigation going through those Excel spreadsheets. So I probably won't make too many of those questions. All right. By the way, there will be 2 sections on the exam. Concept questions where it's just you, the pencil, and the paper, no formula sheet and so on, no calculator, and then the problem solving after that. Where you,
What about the percentage of concept problem solving?
I don't want to commit myself, but it'll probably be maybe 35 to 40% of the points will be concept questions, and then the remainder would be problem solving.
We expect to have concept questions in the earlier questions.
Yes, there can be concept questions, and in fact, that's a good way for me to make the questions easier for the older material is to make them concept questions. So yes, you can expect there to be concept questions from the earlier material. Was there a question in the back? Excuse me? In the computer lab, yeah. Right. All right. Any last questions about the final? All right. Here is a picture of a garment production factory. And I don't know if you've ever seen like video of how quickly these people can make and sew clothing. But it's unbelievable. They can sew pants just like they're going through the seam, you know, pants this long, and they'll do it in 1 or 2 seconds, just so fast. And by comparison, when I was in high school, all of the students were required to take just a small unit of sewing, if you can believe that. We had something called a home economics class. Probably you didn't, right? Maybe in movies you've seen like the home economics class where, you know, we do a few weeks of cooking, a few weeks of learning how to sew, just so that we can all take care of ourselves when we go off to college, right? So, you know, one of our assignments was to sew a pillow. And so we're trying to sew and going so slowly. And our fingers are at risk. You know, it's a miracle that everybody still has fingers that went through that class. But we're going slowly. So what's the difference between how quickly they can sew things and then the speed that I'm going as I sew my pillow in high school? It's experience. It's maybe I value my fingers more than them. No, I'm sure that they value their fingers because it's their livelihood, and it's just they're better at it because they've done it more. You know, once you've sewn 10,000 pair of pants, you're going to be really fast at it. You know all the tricks of the trade.
Maybe there's like a system like you sew like that.
Yeah.
You get them to sew.
Yeah. There can be like a pattern to it.
Things that we-
Right. Right. And I think the same thing is true whether you're doing something like sewing garments or working in a factory, that once you become familiar with the tools and once you become familiar with the layout of the engine and where the parts go, you get much better over time. And that's one of the reasons why employers often will pay more for more experienced workers. And you probably noticed that as you were doing the research for your project, that when you first get hired, maybe you were a little bit depressed when you found out what the hiring salaries were in the UAE. I think that here in the UAE, probably the difference between the hiring salary and in 3 years, that's a huge difference, right? Like they're giving you big raises those first few years. In the US, you're still getting some raises, but they're not as big as that. They start you off low, and then you're still earning low, even later. Whereas in the UAE, they start you low, and then you're earning a lot after a couple of years. All right? So it's because of the experience curve. Even though you've been in university for 4 years, you're going to show up at your employer, and they're just going to say, oh, they don't know how to do anything. So it was the same for me when I got to my employer. So learning and improvement can be modeled using an equation. And by model, what I mean is a representation of reality, a numeric or a graphical representation of reality. And there's a couple of different kinds of models. One kind of model is an empirical model. An empirical model is when we just notice that the data seems to follow some sort of a trend. Like if the data is scattered like this, and we say, well, maybe I'll put this into Excel and do some curve fitting. And you notice that if we have the time and then the number of bacteria. I also teach environmental engineering, and so I'm talking about bacteria a lot in the environmental engineering. If you notice that it seems to be tapering off somehow, this would be a first-order reaction. And so you could find the kinetics of the reaction by looking at that curve. That's an empirical equation. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to try and model human behavior with a fundamental equation. And we're going to call that an experience curve or a manufacturing process function. And so here's the nuts and bolts of that curve. What we start off with is trying to find out something called the learning curve slope parameter. And this is a little bit tricky, so let me try and explain it in detail. If you look at how much time it takes to do the first item, like if you're sewing a pair of pants, and then to double the number of pants that you've made. So going from 1 to 2, you've now doubled your experience with sewing pants. If you doubling it again would be to go from your second pair of pants to your fourth pair of pants. So now you've doubled your experience. Going from 4 to 8, 8 to 16, I think you see the pattern. Okay, so that's doubling your experience. So if you take the ratio of how long it took from the first to the second, or from the second to the fourth, and so on, then that will give you S. And sometimes it's spoken of as a percentage, like we say an 80% experience curve. What that means is that it takes 80% as much time to make your 8th pair of pants as it did to make your 4th pair of pants. So that's how the learning curve slope parameter works. Once you have that, you calculate this exponent n by just taking the log of s and dividing it by the log of 2. And that's what we call the learning curve exponent. U is going to be, if we're trying to find out how much time it takes to solve the U, like the 100th pair of pants, then U would be 100. It's just whatever output number you're trying to find out how long it takes for. And then finally, K is the amount of time or whatever it is we're measuring. It's not always time that's used in this function, but it's the amount of something required to complete a task. And so it's the first time you did it, you start with K. So let me illustrate this with an example. Sewing a pair of pants. Let's say that it takes you 85 minutes to sew the first pair of pants, and then you double your amount of pants ever sewed by going on to the second pair of pants. And so it took you 76.5. You must have learned a lot from the first time, because now you're saving almost 10 minutes on that second pair of pants. And then we notice we also have data for the fourth pair of pants. It took 68.85 minutes. So let's start off by calculating S in this example. All right, first K, the first pair of pants is 85 minutes. That's our first pair. And second pair is 76.5 minutes. Okay, so S is going to be 76.5 minutes divided by 85 minutes. 0.90. this is a 90% experience curve. 90% meaning our second pair of pants only took 90% of the time that the first pair of pants took. Well, let's check that because we also know how long it took to make the fourth pair. So let's do from the second to the fourth. S was 68.85 minutes divided by 76.5 minutes. Also 90%. So it's following the pattern. Now I got a good question today in the first section, and that is, what if it doesn't follow the pattern? Then what do you do? Well, in some cases, reality can't be modeled as easily as just plugging it into a function like this. And so you will find exceptions, but it might be an exception for a reason. It might be that maybe when an employee is in training, they don't have access to all of the tools. And so there might be one section of the learning curve where they're learning slowly, but then all of a sudden you give them some new tool, and then they're learning much more quickly once they have access to the real equipment. And so in that case, you could maybe break it up into two different functions. Mm-hmm.
Professor, how can you compare here the first and second pair and here the second and fourth with the third pair?
It's because we're doubling the number that have been created. It's because of that idea of the ratio of time to double the total number previously made. And so 1 to 2, you've doubled the amount that you've made. And then if you've finished 2, to have that same doubling, you have to go to 4. And so you're skipping right over 3. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What we're saying is all those factors go into this equation. It's the worker's learning that makes it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like at the beginning, I have some problems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the atmosphere of the work,
Yeah.
place whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then when I'm comfortable, I
Mm-hmm.
produce more,
Yeah.
faster and faster.
Well, if that was the case, maybe that's built into this function, but there's a lot of human variability that can't be predicted. So we're not considering that. Or you could say maybe this takes that into account. Like we're just saying that people get better at things over time. Maybe they get better for a lot of reasons. And maybe just how comfortable you are in the work environment is one of the reasons why you're getting better over time. But in my research, I do some research that's related to human behavior, and especially like in the learning environment, there's huge variability that like you can never come up with an equation that really describes people very well. Human behavior, even if it has several parameters in it, the formulas don't capture all of the variability. Okay, so we know S, and we've checked it on all of the data we've got. Let's calculate N. It's going to be the log of S divided by the log of 2. Log of 0.90 divided by the log of 2. Okay, that's negative 0.1520. So in part A, it's asking how much time to make the 10th pair of pants. If we're looking for the 10th pair of pants, then U equals 10. So we're going to put that into the formula here. All right, 85 minutes is how long it took to make the first one. So 85 minutes, and then we're going to have 10 to the n power, 10 to the negative 0.1520. That's 85 minutes, 0.7047. it should take 59.9 minutes to make the 10th pair of pants. Yes? Yeah, we don't have data for the third pair of pants, right?
So the second, compared to the fourth, is 90%.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the third one is less?
Let's take a look at the pattern. Because here in part B, it says, what's the total required time to sew all 10 pair of pants? And so to know that, we have to find the first, the second, the third, the fourth, and add them all up. So rather than doing that individually on the board, let's do it on Excel and look at the pattern. All right, so here's how we would do it on Excel. We already know S. We've calculated that the ratio is 0.9. We already know N. N is negative 0.152. And then K is 85. That was the first time. So what we're going to have here is U, which is whatever pair of pants we're on, and then the time in minutes. So the first, the second, the third, and so on. Let me drag that down through 10. All right. So the function is going to be 85, anchor that, times U to the power of N. And I also want to anchor that. All right, so 85, hopefully this number 2 will be 76.5, which is the data that we had, yeah. We'll drag it down through all of them. And 59.9 is what we got for the last one. So part B is asking what is the total amount of time it took to make all 10 of those pair of pants, and we just added up. So 675 minutes. So your question was basically 90% is when you're doubling your productivity. So going from 1 to 2, the ratio is 90%. 2 to 4, the ratio is 90%. But let's look at how much time, like the time difference. Because I think that's maybe addressing the question you had. If we say, let's do it here, how much less time did it take to do this one than the one before it? So what this is showing is that we're now 8.5 minutes faster on the second pair of pants than we were on the first pair of pants. Okay? Now let's drag that through. So this learning curve is showing that we make big gains at first, but our gains are slowing down. We're not getting that much better each time we make another pair of pants because we found all the tricks. There aren't as many shortcuts left for us to learn the more we do. So S is only about the doubling. So going from 5 to 10 is doubling the number. So the ratio should be 90% if we do, let's just look at that. The 10th unit divided by the 5th unit, 90%. Are there any other questions about how this function works? All right, well, I'd like you to get some experience with it on the in-class exercise. Does everyone have a copy of that paper? On the in-class exercise, let me zoom in here. You're solving a Rubik's Cube. Has anyone ever done that before? I understand that Dr. Serter's really good at the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
Like he can solve it really quickly. So never go against him in a contest, is what I hear is important. All right, so here's the thing. Let's say that you want to find out basically, in this one, what's the main question here? Oh, after you've done it 100 times, how long will it take you to solve it after your 100th try? The only problem is you don't know, you forgot to time it the very first time you did it. So there is a way to sort of back calculate how long it took you on your first try, but Yep, you're going to have to solve for try 1 using the patterns that is in the data, the rest of it there. So apply the same kind of approach that we did in the example there to find out how long will it take you to solve it on your 100th try. So you can calculate the S value either with the 2nd to the 4th or the 4th to the 8th. With the S value, calculate N. And then you can calculate how much time it took the first time, or estimate anyway, by using that same S ratio. And once you have all the factors, you can find that for the 100th try, it should take about 14.1 minutes.